and it's March the 20th, 2013, and we're in the parlor at Mackin House, and I'm talking to Jim Allard. So thanks for coming by today, Jim, and wanted to talk a bit about your life and your family. Maybe we could start by talking about when the Allards first came to Coquitlam.
Well, we've been here for a long time. I guess it would be my dad's dad came here from actually from Saginaw, Michigan, in 1912 to work in the mill, and they needed good tradespeople. They needed the good French community to work in the mill. So he came here, and he had I don't know how many kids, and then that would have been my dad's father, and everybody in our family sort of died early, because that would have been my dad's grandfather. He, if you read that Coquitlam Now book, he was in the logging milling business, and he was cutting a big cedar tree on a springboard. The branch came down and hit the springboard, knocked him off the springboard, and he crashed and broke his neck. So that ended that career. And then of course, my dad's dad was in business as well, in the logging business. Actually sort of took over the family business. And in, I think it was like 1926, in his, I don't know, his new car, because they were sort of successful, he crashed at Columbia and Burnett, and he died shortly thereafter. So my grandma, Eva Paquette, had 5 kids, and she was 26 years old. And there was no welfare or anything. And I'll say one thing about the Catholic Church and the community: they looked after their people.
So they looked after her?
Well, they did, and of course, if you read the book and you hear the stories, my old man went to work, cutting wood for Gate and Lig, who turned out to be the owner, president of Commercial Truck, who was a very successful. There's a lot of guys that have come through Millardville that have actually been successful as business people, and so the old man ended up, at a very young age, cutting wood, swamping trucks, driving trucks, and he eventually took a trade with his dad's brother, Bill, who had a foundry in New Westminster. He took a trade as a molder, and then, of course, he got I forget what you call it, an exemption, because they were making war things, but he quit and he went and joined the Navy. And one of the things about the Allards, we have very loud voices. We can project our voice. And the only reason my old man got to be a chief petty officer was because he could yell, or he could talk loudly. Everybody could hear him, left, right. So, when he got back out of the service, he served 2.5 years in the Navy, and the war was over. He came and he went to work with a guy with a cement business. In 2 weeks, he owned it, and and he started, and very hardworking in those days. And he started. He always wanted to drive a truck, so he eventually got his own truck. And that's how Allard Contractors started, in the cement business and the gravel business. And he started all this thing. And I tell a funny story about fast forward, and he was leasing a gravel pit on Pipeline Road from Lafarge. And he was digging in the pit, and Mel Earl, who was the pit manager at the time, was doing a tour with the president from Quebec, or from France, who was there in their big black Cadillac, Le Sueur. And anyway, they come into the pit, and Mel says to my father, "You're digging past the property line." Well, my father didn't know where the property line was. And "You're kicked out of here." And in front of the president, Le Sueur, he showed his authority. And they start talking. Well, and if you're in Millardville, you understand and you speak French. We're all French. And so my old man started talking to Le Sueur in French, and Mel Earl didn't speak French. Well, we're having a conversation of what's going on there. And after an hour, Le Sueur says to Mel, "You leave that guy there." Now, my father then realized that the property that he was digging into wasn't Lafarge's. So he went and bought it. But he only bought half because, he found out who owned half, so he bought half. And he bought half for $10,000. And the lawyers, my uncle who was in real estate, said, "You're crazy. You can't do that, Jim." Anyway, he said, "We'll find out who owns the other half and we'll get the other half." So I went and bought the other half. Well, the guy said, "How much you pay?" $10,000. So he bought the other half for $10,000. Then, in those days, the wives, divorced, had what was called the Wives Protection Act. So I think his name was Warren, had a lien on the property because he was divorcing his wife. So she said, "How much did my husband get?" He got $10,000. So my old man had to buy her off for $10,000. So half cost 10, the other half cost 20. That was how he ended up with our first piece of property. And by the way, if you go by that piece of property today, it's now Polygon's a development. There's 2,000 houses on it. It's right north of Lafarge Park, and it's called Danny Springs and Lantern, and I mean, it is unbelievable. And we sold it. Now, it's too bad my father wasn't alive to see that, because we sold it for a lot of money, and he would be doing a double back handspring with a full twist if he saw what we got, but he never did get to see what we sold it for. So we've had a very interesting career. When he was, I don't know, I think about 55, by this time Barry and I are in the business, and he comes in and he says, "I bought an airplane." Well, my brother had trained as an AME with CP Air, coming right out of university, right out of high school. And Barry says, "Well, you bought an airplane?" "Yeah, and I need $35,000. So we gave him $35,000 because we had a pretty successful business. And then he says, "Well, it's on floats." My brother says, "Jesus, you don't have a pilot's license. You need a float endorsement to fly." Anyway, to make a long story short, he bought an airplane, and then he bought a hangar, and then he ended up buying 25% of Hayak Air. And then we ended up with the whole of Hayak Air through the 80s, and that was a real challenge with interest rates at 22%. And of course, he took that, and we took that, and of course, we just sold our float plane terminal in Victoria to Ledcor in July of 2012. And our youngest son, Marty, is the base manager there, and he just got his pilot's license. So that's all very interesting of how he went from, a very tough childhood to some business success. So, and then of course, I got to back up a little bit too, because you might want to know how Barry and I got involved in the business in the first place. The old man had a general manager named Bert Franklin, and we had the job to excavate for Alberta Utilities, Denver Graham, the Lougheed Mall, which is now in the Lougheed Mall. We were doing the site excavation. And we were a couple days into maybe a couple weeks, maybe even a month into the project. And Bert Franklin quit and took the job away from my dad. Well, my dad phoned Barry and me, and the next morning at 7 o'clock, I jumped in a tandem truck. Barry jumped in one. My dad jumped back in the pickup truck, and we started to do whatever we could to get some of our business back. But we'd lost the biggest job that we'd ever had. And that summer, I want you to know that there's some guys around here. We worked hard, and we worked long hours to make that thing succeed. We hired a driver, and that September, Barry stayed on, and he was like 18. I mean, like young to be the general manager of this company. And I went back to university, and I ended up getting my, I don't know what I got. I spent a lot of time, and I had a lot of fun at university, and I wasn't very academic. And when I got out of university, I ended up in real estate with my uncle Chuck. And I guess about a year after I graduated, Barry came to me and says, I need to hire somebody. I hire this guy, Maine. And I said, you know what? I'm coming to work. And I would wear a shirt and tie and a jacket every day. But when I came there, I put my cowboy boots and my jeans on. And I very seldom wear a tie anymore. In fact, if I had one on and I was going to the bank, I'd probably take it off and go put my cowboy boots and my jeans on, just to let them know that that where it is. So you know, the opportunities that we've had as a family here to be successful in business is unbelievable. And you know, it all started right here in Millardville. I mean, so. Does that help you?
Yeah, yeah. So tell me about your days going to school and that sort of thing.
Well, again, you know, like I can remember when my mère, Eva, my dad's mother, died. We were coming back from Merritt, and that was a pretty stressful situation. And of course, being Catholic, right, I had to go to Our Lady of Lourdes, and I had to learn how to do all those right things. And so when she died, I still was going to I was in grade 1 that year. They only spoke French, and I kind of liked English. And I didn't like, the nuns were pretty tough. You know, if you stepped out of line, they'd make you kneel by the desk and break a ruler over your head. So I didn't like that too much. Anyway, and I've never seen this, but I've heard about this. But so I went to that school till Christmas, and then they went on strike because the government wasn't funding the Catholic Church with enough money. And apparently, they say that I was at the front of the strike, of the picket line, walking wherever we were walking. Anyway, the school, the Our Lady of Lourdes, shut down for this strike. And so we had to go to school, so we went to Millside. So this is grade 1, halfway through the year, and I go to Millside. And I told you a little bit earlier about there was not a lot of sports fields. But when I got to Millside, they had a baseball bat, a glove, and a ball. And you know, there was no way I was going back to that school. I mean, like, we didn't have a baseball bat or a mitt or anything like that. So that was my beginning in Millside. And you know, we talked earlier, but you know Johnny DeCare's pool hall, and you know, John Grevlin, the shoemaker, and thrifts, all those things. So I started going to school in Millside, and that's where I met. Hopefully someday you'll talk to Julie Chan. You know, these were the Chinese kids that were down working in the mill, which were a little less fortunate than the French working in the mill, I can tell you that. I believe that to be the case. And then I went to school at Millside, and then moved up to when Winslow was a junior high school, from grade 7 till 7, 8, and 9. And then from 9 to 12, I went to Como Lake when it was a high school. And in those days, they had grade 13, which was first year, senior matric. And then I went to UBC and found out where I majored in B&B.
B&B?
Beer and Broads. So I had a good time there, and I eventually graduated in science with a degree in math. Math was always sort of easier for me to. I had the least amount of work and the most success in math. So that was sort of my career. But you know, like when I go back and think about how we grew up around here, and you know, I can remember, you know, Schoolhouse Creek and Laurentian Creek and Booth Creek and all those creeks. I mean, I spent my whole youth going down there and fishing when there was fish in those creeks. And it's embarrassing to have to say this today because, you know, being in the gravel business, everybody thinks that all we do is kill fish. But, you know, I can remember going down there with our hanky and pulling salmon out of that thing for sport and recreation. You don't get to do that anymore. I mean, some of us were not very environmentally aware of what was going on. But those creeks were full of trout. I mean, I've got pictures of us catching trout. I mean, that was one of my recreational hobbies. I've probably fished more creeks in this community than most people could ever imagine. So and of course, you know, like I see that we used to hunt pheasants behind Millside School. I mean, and we used to do that when we were like 14 years old when you got your first hunting license. So there was a lot of things that went on in this community that were very rural. And of course, today we're so urban. It's hard to believe. I'd also say that, you know, when we talk about those years, I talk about Essendale. Essendale was a very big community. And when I see what goes on in Maine and Hastings, I get really ticked because maybe we didn't do some things right with Essendale. But boy, some of those displaced people that have ended up down there, that is a tragedy. But we learned to swim at Biscoe when it was a boys' school, you know, a jail for youth. And we learned to swim in Biscoe because we'd go there, and I can remember bowling at Pennington Hall when the bowling alley was there. I can remember when Don Cunnings would take us to Crease Clinic and to Pennington Hall to put on gymnastic shows, you know, and I think I would have been 10 years old in '54. The Lions Roar in '54. And the guys would do back handsprings and, you know, around Empire Stadium. And, you know, just backing up on that, Don Cunnings ended up being the Parks and Recreation Director for Coquitlam. And, you know, there is a man who deserves a lot of credit for where we are in Parks and Rec today, I'll tell you. Because we had a springboard, a trampoline, and a mat. And Don Cunnings. We used to practice in a one-room school in Colony Farm beside what was the orchard on Burnett below Cape Horn down there now. That orchard is overgrown. They talk about the trees on Essendale, but nobody even knows. I'm sure nobody knows there was an orchard there. I mean, as kids, we used to go there and steal the plums and the cherries and hope that we didn't get locked up in there. So, you know, and Essendale was a big part of the community. Lots of people worked there, and look at it today. It's a bit of a disaster for all that land and all those buildings and all that infrastructure is terrible. But it was interesting to grow up and be a part of that area. I mean, I don't know how many people know where Mundy Lake is, but and Lost Lake in behind Mundy Lake up there. We used to hike in there when it was. I mean, it's a peat lake, right? Almost like Como Lake, but you couldn't get in there. Well, now it's I mean, it's part of the recreational stuff. So, and I also get a kick out of we're in the gravel industry, right? And you know, when we look at what we have here in the gravel business, do you know that Lougheed North Road was a gravel pit? Thompson Ready Mix was on the Burnaby side. That was a gravel pit. Schoolhouse Road was the municipal pit, was Tom Allard's pit, was Floyd Munson's gravel pit, right on Schoolhouse and Decatur up there. And you know, the Laurentian, where the senior singers, that used to be a municipal gravel pit. And then when you go out to Pipeline Road, where nobody in the whole world knew where Pipeline Road was, right? There was the Deeks Lafarge gravel pit, and that's where the old man met LeSueur. And then the Greater Vancouver Water District's gravel pit was there. The municipal pit was there where the fire hall is. So all of these gravel pits that have been, City Hall was on a gravel pit. I mean, the Douglas College, Pine Tree Secondary, the fire hall, Lafarge Park, all of those areas were exploited for the gravel resource. And I get a kick out of it because I'm sure that nobody realizes what went on before all these commercial, residential, urban developments took place, and it was gravel extraction, which just absolutely boggles my mind when we look at how we don't like our gravel operators. So, now what else can I tell you?
Well, you mentioned speaking French. How common was French French in Millardville when you were growing up? Was it the main language?
You know, I have sort of a very interesting take on French. The French were not the most senior citizens in the world. So if you were French, you were maybe a little bit down on the status ladder. So it became very important to be English because you could be from New West or Sapperton or Vancouver if you were English. And it's kind of interesting because I stayed away from French, and yet I needed French to graduate. And I took 3 years to pass French 110, which was first year French at university. And I traveled around Europe for a year with people that had majored in French, and I could get by in French because I could speak and understand it because very early, of course, I am from Millardville, and but in the days when we were younger, it was less of a status situation, and so I sort of abandoned French. And by the way, my father was completely bilingual, and it's probably one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made in my life. If you can speak, the more languages you can speak, the better off in life you are. End of story. But it's perception and reality. I should have paid attention to it. And if my grandmother had lived, I can tell you right now, the outcome would have been way different.
How did the French and English kids get along? Was there any conflict there?
You know what? I think one of the things, when you're in grade 1, whether you're Chinese or French, hey, you play together, okay? So I never noticed it, but it's, I don't know. It's like how would you say it? It's like a cloud that's there. You don't know it, you don't say it, but it was, in my opinion, it was there. And like when the Catholic school went back after the strike, a lot of the hardcore French kids went back to Our Lady of Lourdes. I didn't. I stayed in the public school system. They went back, and we eventually met up again at university, but there was way fewer French kids that came back into university than there were English kids. I mean, they took the trade jobs, and a lot of the English kids ended up, like I said, being school teachers or whatever. So,
why was that, do you think?
Well, when the mill was here, everybody and anybody could get a job in the mill. It's not like it is today. The mill looked after them. A lot of those guys stayed with the mill and they retired there. And they moved right up through from, sweeping the green chain to becoming mill managers. When my father had the concrete business, he eventually he ran into some Italians from Queensboro that came over here, and he had a crew of Italians that were the toughest guys you ever. They could shovel gravel all day. They were tough guys making concrete in those days, and those Italians were sort of like a notch lower than the Frenchmen. It's interesting because you ask about that. My father did 2 major projects, and one of them was the Nanaimo Sports Center in 1950 or something. And they said they've hired an expert to pour this concrete, and that was a big slab for an ice rink. They just tore it down and recently and replaced it, and the Victoria one. He did the Victoria one and the Nanaimo rinks that are both torn down now. But the deal was that he had these Italians and some of his French buddies, right? And when you mix concrete by hand, right, that's tough, and finish it, right? And of course, the only thing that you need to know is that when you finish a concrete slab like that, you better have a lot of beer there for those boys, I can tell you. So those were some of the successes of getting those kind of people and friends. And so I think that what I call the trades was where there were opportunities, and some of us, some of the guys went on to try and do bigger and better things.
So tell me about some of the other big projects your company did.
What is well? I'll tell you one which we've just done recently. We now have a number of companies, but we have Allard Contractors, which is the gravel, and we have Coquitlam Concrete Products, which is the ready mix. And now they're building high rises in the Coquitlam Center. And there is one that we just did on May 26th, 2012, and it's Norm Cressy's M3. M2 or M3. He's got M1, M2, M3. This is a 40-story high-rise. Now, when you start a high-rise, you do what's called a raft slab. It basically holds the whole 40 stories up. That raft slab has to be a continuous pour. And that pour for that project was 4,450 meters. Now, that's huge, and it's got to be continuous. And so we bid the job, and we have two plants, and they each do 1,250 meters. That's 2,500 meters. How are you going to do 4,450 meters? Well, we've been around, and the Allard brand is pretty significant, I can tell you that. And we have friends, and we got Greystone to help us. And so we had 4 plants, our 2 plants, one in Maple Ridge for Greystone, one in Langley for Greystone. We had 53 trucks, we had 5 pumps, we had 6 flag girls, and we started at 3:30 in the morning with permits, and we finished at 6 o'clock that night. And I had the opportunity to run into Norm Cressy after that job, and I knew who he was, but I'd never really talked to him. And I ran into him to the Hotel Vancouver, and I said, Norm, my name is Jim Allard, and I'd just like to thank you for having the courage to give that job to us. And I said, that was a big job. And we talked a little bit about it, and he says, yeah, to cut a big check and all that sort of stuff. And then he says to me, and I said, that was pretty good, He says, yeah, I was there all day. He says, I was just driving around and watching you. I wanted to make sure that you guys could do it. Now, that is a huge, confidence in what we can do. And so when you talk about bigger jobs, that one is huge because it tells you that we're respected in the industry, right? And 2, if we say we can do it, and we will do it. So we've managed to build a very successful gravel and ready mix business. And of course, the underpinning of it is that we own the land underneath it, and it's becoming. And we have gravel. We have we have 2 pits in Coquitlam, what we call our D&E and our Pit A, and then we have another one in Maple Ridge, which we just actually sold for housing to Morningstar and Polygon, and then we have another one in Mission, and then we have another one in Parksville, and then we have sort of a one in Seashell, but that's a crown lease, and it's just a disaster with dealing with that one. So that's a. But anyway, there it is, and of course. Barry has 2 boys. His boys, I have 2 boys, Daniel and Marty, that are 30 and 32. And Barry has 2 boys, Patty and Ben, that are 29 and 31. They're all in between. They're all a year apart. And Barry's oldest son, Ben, is our salesman for the ready mix. And I mean, he's hardcore, and he's got to live up to the Allard brand. So it's good.
So Barry is your
brother.
Your brother?
And Barry runs the day-to-day operations. I mean, I'm the BSer. He's the real day-to-day guy. So, no, we've been very successful. The interesting part of it too is though, a business is more than just what you sell. And our very first employee, Ronnie Bray, has just retired. He's the same age as I am. He started before I did, okay? He actually worked for my father. He's 68, I'm 68, he's 68, same age. And he's worked almost every day of his working life for us. And, you talk about loyalty and trust. Now, guess what? He's got 2 sons, Doug and Andy. Well, he's got 3 sons, but Doug and Andy both work for us. They're as good a loader operators as you're ever going to find, ever. And we always tell a funny story about his daughter, Sam. Sam, Ronnie didn't discriminate between, there was no gender equity misrepresentation in his family. Hey, Sam, when she was 14 years old, she had to come in on Saturday with him and help service the loaders. So she had to clean the air filters and grease the buckets and do all those things that you do in servicing the loaders. Well, guess what? She has to learn how to run the loader. Well, like, she's 16 years old, and she was one of the first women loader operators in a gravel pit. And when she was 16, she was loading trucks. Her dad, Ronnie Bray, our first employee, taught her how to run a loader. Now, she's gone on to do other things, but it was like nobody could believe. And she was a very attractive lady, too, so that made it even tougher for those poor truck drivers to have a good-looking lady loader operator. So, when you listen to the radios and the CBs, what's going on there? Well, interesting. So my point is that we have had some people that have worked for us over the years that have been truly loyal, good employees. And so, I think we have a reputation of also being fair and reasonable to our employees. And they get well paid, so that's also another thing. But we do have some top-notch people working for us.
So how has the business changed since you started out?
Oh, by the way, I was the president of the aggregate producers for 10 years. Well, more than that, from 88 till 94. Putting back into the industry. And, the sand and gravel industry, that's a tough business. And it was basically, be where you wanted to. And so I had the opportunity to live through the regulatory chaos that exists, and it still exists. And there's a huge regulatory gap right now, where you have a provincially permitted mine, so you have to get your mine permit from the provincial government, and that's a very rigorous process. So we do, and we get that, and then if you want to crush, screen, or wash, or stockpile gravel, that comes under. Oh, gee, what the heck's going on here? Let me just shut this off, guys.
No problem.
Sorry about that. I should have shut that off earlier. But anyway, what happens? You got this regulatory chaos. You've got the municipalities that have zoning jurisdiction. They have regulatory control over the uses in the gravel pit, the crushing and screening. And then you got the provincial mines over here. So you get this conflict. So I've spent like 10 of my years fighting with to clarify who has jurisdiction in a mine. And the provincial government doesn't like to trump the municipality's jurisdiction. The municipality always wants more power. But the point is that municipalities can change the zoning on you, and then you're out of business, or you're out of compliance. And so it's very difficult. So I've spent a lot of time on the industry side. So how have things changed? When my father went in there, he just dug. Just go in there and dig. There was no permits. There was nothing. There was no soil removal bylaws. And so now the regulatory regime is very problematic. It is a problem. Hopefully the governments, provincial and municipal, will get their ducks in order, because, it absolutely boggles my mind, because gravel is the cheapest construction material known to man. You mix it with cement powder and you get concrete. You mix it with liquid asphalt and you get blacktop, which builds our infrastructure. And if we keep sterilizing gravel and moving it out of being economic, it just pushes the cost of our infrastructure up. Like, 80% of all gravel is consumed by the public purse. Whether it's your schools, your roads, your highways, your sewer lines, your water lines. So we need to look after the resource to make sure that we can use it to keep our infrastructure costs down. I mean, anyway, that's a whole different issue. I'd be here a long time if we got off on that one. What else?
Let's back up and talk about your family some more. What kind of jobs did your uncles do?
Well, that's a real good question because my dad's dad died when he was 26. But Tom Allard had a gravel pit on Schoolhouse Road, and he, with a guy named Floyd Munson, eventually operated that. And Gordon Allard is still alive. He's another, I don't know if he's my cousin. I'm not quite exactly sure how he fits into the family. And then those Allards were, Bill Allard had the foundry, Tom Allard had a gravel pit. What else? Oh, and I guess the women's side, Dorothy Messier, who was married to George Messier, her husband was a mill manager, and his kids, I call him Baby George, and if he heard me, he'd probably just shoot me. But Raymond and George and Evie, you know, they all had successful careers. George retired as a manager from, I don't even remember which company. And then, of course, my dad's sister, Evelyn, she had 4 kids, Ricky, Garth, and Garth is a helicopter maintenance guy that he works all over the world keeping helicopters in the air and whole fleets. And Ricky does a plumbing contractor in Vancouver. And their sister, Lynn Ramsey, is a QC. So there's actually some intelligence in the family because Lynn, I think, got it all. And then on my mother's side, in fact, I think there's only one of my mom's sisters and brothers left alive. Albert just died like 3 months ago. He was 83 and fell down and broke his hip. And he was living in the States. And then Pearlie and her husband Leo. And well, that's interesting because Pearlie was married twice. Pearlie was married to a guy named Jack Colvin, who had where the Pit River Bridge is, there's a farm there, and right at Como Lake coming down the tower line, that was his farm, Jack Colvin's farm, and Pearlie was she was a bit of a lady, and Jack would deliver milk. He had a dairy farm and deliver milk, and Pearlie would take the nickels or the quarters out of the purse to keep some money. She was funny. Anyway, that marriage didn't last very long, and then she remarried Leo, and they had a couple kids. And those are my cousins, Marlene and Sheila and Ronnie are the Amoros, and and both fairly big families. And by the way, well, getting back to my mom's side, talking about the mill, her dad, Pete Jacura, he was a millwright looking after the equipment down here for 100 years, and he worked night shift. And we never saw him during the day because he worked at night and he slept during the day. And I think Pete Jacura's fame was he was a tough man. He was a big man, and I forget who it was, but one of those he boxed one of the Joe Louis or some boxer that was famous, and everybody knew that Pete Jacura had gone some rounds with those guys. So I guess some of the guys were smart, some of the guys were tough. It was pretty interesting. And in fact, my grandma and Pete Jacura, I mean, they lived at Blue Mountain in Austin. That's where we went to. So yeah, so a lot of stories there.
So there's an Allard Street not too far from here.
It's named after Tom Allard, my dad's brother. No, my dad's father's brother. Tom Allard, Bill Allard, Jim Allard. Those were all the Allards that came from the Saginaw, Michigan, 1912. So we've been here a while.
Yeah, how did they come to name the street after Tom Allard?
Well, he was a counselor, he was a counselor here on the Coquitlam Council, or whatever it was at the time, and so he got a street named after him. So, pretty interesting.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the businesses along here. Which ones? What can you remember about?
Well, I can, I can remember John Grevling, who was a shoemaker, who lived in his shoe store just down here on Burnett Street, on the north side. And when we were kids, we'd go in there, and my dad would go in there, and in those days, they would get their work boots, and John would make them by hand. But his claim to fame was he made the cork boots for the guys that worked on the log booms at Fraser Mills. And I mean, he was a true craftsman. And eventually that his building got taken away from him, or it was no longer there, and he moved into Sapperton. And I can remember, in fact, I think we still have a pair of boots that John Grevling made that we've kind of kept, that were my dad's boots, and they were leather work boots. They were significant boots, and you had to get on the list to get your boots made, and you didn't get them in a week. It took them time to build those. So it was John Grevling, and then down on the south side there, on the wood walkway, was old Johnny DeCare's pool hall, which eventually got taken down, and he used to have the pool hall. You know where the Woods Hotel, they've just changed the name of it, but across the street and in the basement used to be Johnny DeCare's pool hall. And I spent a lot of time in that pool hall, I can tell you. When I was going to university, that was the recreation, so I liked that.
That was where the neighborhood hung out, sort of thing?
Well, it was a very interesting place, the Millardville Pool Hall, I can tell you that. So I was never really good, but I could do okay. And what other businesses were along there? Well, thrifts. And then there was the hardware store, which I think that building is still there. But of course, that's all development. It's all housing and apartments now. I mean, that was it. And then, of course, you got to, and then there's the little confectionery store on the corner of Burnett and Schoolhouse, okay? And that used to be Cosmos. And old man Cosmos used to run that little confectionery store. And when we were in grade 6, we got to go out and be the patrollers. So the kids would cross the thing. And I can always remember going in there and when we were in grade 6 and getting a bottle of cream soda. That was the big deal. Kick Cola. Anyway, those were, I mean, the confectionery store is still there, but not the way it was when we went to elementary school. You know, the other thing is, you talked about some of the people that have been around. And my wife, Colleen Talbot, her mother, who passed away a number of years ago, but she broke her ankle at our place and had to go to the Royal Columbian Hospital. And so she was in there for a couple of weeks. And while we're there, we run into a lady who was volunteering there, and her name was Miss Kenner. She was the principal of Millside Elementary School. And I mean, she must have been 80 or 90 years old. I mean, like, she was old. And I had to go talk to her and had to introduce myself to her. And it was kind of interesting to go and talk to somebody that you hadn't seen for 50 years and just talk about some of the old time. In fact, I was back at Millside. I guess maybe, I don't know how many years ago it was, but they had a 25-year reunion. That was funny, going back there. And by the way, we have a very famous lady that came out of Millside, and her name is Judith Lum, the opera singer, who's still, her name was, it was Judith Lum, but now I think it's Judith Forrest. But she won everybody contest we ever had, and I wasn't a great fan of opera, but she sure was, she's sure become very good at what she does.
Really?
Yeah.
What were the teachers like at Millside?
By the way, I'm not opposed to the strap. I know that I got it a few times from Mrs. Kenmore, and you know what? You smartened up when you got that strap. Yeah, no, it was a good school. Hey, didn't do me any harm, I don't think. I have to ask the rest of Coquitlam, though. No, I liked it, and you know, one of the other things that you asked me to talk about things, but when I was in grade 7 and 8, I went on a special program, and it was Mr. Vincent was doing a PhD at UBC, and so for 2 years, we didn't do anything. There was a class of us that for this one class, all we did was arithmetic, adding and subtracting and multiplying, and and how to add up columns. And to this day, I get a kick out of it because I can probably add columns and columns and number faster than most guys can punch it in with an adding machine. And I get a kick out of my kids because they'll do something and all they can do is put it into the adding machine. They don't have any common sense. They don't know. When you take 100, 100, 100, right, and they come up with 5,000, you say, well, it can't be. It just can't be that. And I made a mistake here. So I got a kick out of that, and that was very interesting to, take you out of the mainstream and put you over there for him to do his thing. And I think they got the right guy because I enjoyed that. That was worthwhile. And then the other thing, going on from, a couple guys, grades 7, 8, and 9. I want you to know that there was a guy up there named Joe Bianco. His son is still around, but Joe's dead. But he was the band master. So in grade 7, I joined the band. And I got credits from grade 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, but I didn't get it for grade 12. I could not play a scale. I had a tin ear. I didn't do anything. But I could do okay in math and physics. And Joe Bianco was teaching math and physics, and so he thought I was a reasonably smart kid. So every time it came to do your practical test, I lost my mouthpiece. I left my trumpet at home. I did all those things, and I never did it for 5 years. Finally, he said, "You have to," and I said, Joe, I can't do that. You got to be kidding me. So I failed grade 12 music, but I got credits all the way for grade 11. So Joe Bianco was, and I loved going on the band trips. Like we went to Vancouver Island and all those sort of things. That was a ton of fun to be a part of the band, but I couldn't play. I wish I could, because if I could have, I'd have been dangerous. And so band was always interesting. And then the other thing was football. And so I did play football. And of course, our coach was Dan Doyle. And Dan, Millardville was also a tough place. I mean, there were some tough guys. And Dan Doyle, I tell you, made more men of boys and some tough boys in this community. And I always tell the story of when Como Lake played Vancouver College, and we lost 88-0. Hey, and they had a guy named Bobby Bailey who they wouldn't let play. They wouldn't let him play offense. He could only play defense. I think he still scored 11 touchdowns or something. But Dan Doyle was one of those guys who took some tough kids and set them on a good road in life. And then the assistant coach was a guy, Bill Melville, who eventually became a counselor, and there's been some very interesting people that have come through, what I call the Como Lake football thing. And by the way, half of District 43, 15 years ago, was the Como Lake High School football team that went on into education and into management, and George Caldo and Ron Roberge just retired, and there was a whole bunch of guys that eventually came out of the Como Lake. The Dan Doyle, Bill Melville, Como Lake High School football team was an excellent stepping stone to go into teaching. And then those guys, Gary Conley. I mean, I think of those guys that went on to actually retire out of teaching in District 43. So, yeah, going to school here was certainly it was fun. It was interesting. Didn't do me any harm, I don't think. What else can I tell you?
Um,
May Day celebrations?
sorry?
May Day celebrations?
Yeah, May Day celebrations.
Oh, Jesus, maybe. Well, I don't know anything about it. I can never get around that bloody maypole. But again, the May Days. That was a big deal in Blue Mountain Park. The May Day celebration. Today, I mean, it doesn't mean anything like it did in those days. It was a big party. That reminds me of Blue Mountain Park. When my dad was younger, they used to play baseball, and my uncle George Reed was a good baseball player, and they had some pretty good baseball players, and some pretty, and even today, Coquitlam in baseball, kids come here to go to school because they've got a good baseball program in Coquitlam. Well, it went way back to the guys shoveling the concrete and drinking the beer after playing baseball. So there's a long history. Most of the guys today don't remember those guys, but I do remember that my father was very active in that baseball thing, and as well as hockey again. But the only rink in town when we grew up was Queen's Park. We had to go there 5 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that was by the way, that's something we also grew up with, is playing hockey in Queen's Park in New Westminster. That was the only thing we had, but we did that. So I remember skating on the ponds, and I remember my father telling me that they skated across the Fraser River at the Patella Bridge. In fact, I was just talking to Bill LeClaire, who was a counselor, and he said he remembers his dad telling about the same thing, but we haven't seen that in 50 years. So, and we used to go out to Essendale. I mean, where Colony Farm is, when there was the water there, I mean, that was the place to go and skate. And of course, Como Lake, you have to be careful you didn't go through that, but no, it was, skating was, I think there was more opportunities where a pond would freeze in the winter than we've seen in the last 20 years. I mean, I don't know whether it's global warming or what it is, but there it is. What else?
Yeah, you mentioned hunting and fishing. What else did you do in your spare time?
Can I, now, yeah. We're in the gravel business on the Coquitlam River, and we never talked about First Nations. But the First Nation, the Coquitlam has been down there for a long time. And, I do remember when some of the Indians would put their nets across the thing. And when I look back, man, we didn't treat those guys very well. And we really got some things to settle with the Coquitlam First Nations band, in my opinion. But I think about that now. We talk about the harm to the fish. But you know what? That's all they had. I mean, like, it's just like our family way back. There was no welfare. There was nothing. There was, it was the church and your next door neighbors that helped you survive. So, we tend to point fingers. And then, of course, my biggest peeve in this municipality is that at the turn of the century, BC Hydro, or the private company, dammed the Coquitlam River. And the Coquitlam River has been dammed since 1912. And that's what screwed the fish. It wasn't the gravel operators. I mean, they didn't help it. But when I have a theory. No water, no fish. Now, I've sat on the BC Hydro water use permit to get things straightened around and to make the gravel industry better, and we're working at that. And I'll tell you what, we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go, but we've come a long way. But bloody Hydro's got away with murder on that river, and they've ducked. They ducked, and they just said as everybody else. But you know what? Now guys are figuring it out. And some of us on the BC Hydro water use permit said, hey, we need 2 fish valves of water. And now, they're losing water to the river that could otherwise be used for drinking water or hydropower. But it's being looked at, and I want you to know that the gravel guys are a very active part of making sure that comes back, and that's positive. But I don't like to let that hydro off the hook easily. They've managed to stay under the radar screen in this community. The other thing, when we start talking about the river, that's a big part of my life, and I know we're running out of time. But, you know, my father used to push the coal at Essendale because that's how they got power. And they used to dredge the Coquitlam River right up to Redbridge and bring the barge up there to unload the coal. And, you know, we talk about other things. You know where Redbridge is now? Well, just north of it is where the garbage dump was for Essendale. That's all a garbage dump in there. And I cannot understand why we don't know about that. You know, like you talk about things that are here in this community, and you know, I mean, these are the things that are going to be lost. Someday, somebody's going to have to figure that out and fix it. And why that isn't being done? Well, it's now a park or somebody thing. I don't know what it is, but you know, the Coquitlam River has come a long way because some people have taken an interest in it, and there's a group of people that are interested, and they're the gravel guys. And I remember when I was 6 or 7 years old, the Scott brothers used to dig the gravel out of the river. That's not any of the guys that are there today. I want you to be very clear about that. But the Department of Highways used to take the gravel out of the river. That was a standard permitted operation. And of course, probably wasn't the best. But I can also remember swimming in the Coquitlam River. As a kid, from the time I was 6 years old till I was 30, we swam in the river where the guys dig out the gravel and have the swimming holes in there. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that went on in this community that is interesting, and you know, Coquitlam has done very well, I think. You know, you take a look at Lafarge Park and some of the developments, and look what's going on in Burke Mountain. We've been pretty successful as a community, I think. So
Yeah, a lot of changes.
oh yeah. And you know, when I see the Mackin, the heritage here, and it really drives me nuts because I haven't been active in this, but I did do the interview on the Glen Drive Elementary School getting shut down. And you know, I'm not going to be here for another 100 years. So you know, you'd like to pass on what your memories and what you think went on here. So that's why I'm here, to tell you what I think. I don't know whether you heard it, but that's what we think.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much for coming by.
Hey, it's my pleasure, and I hope that some of this may be of value.